That's where again, Europe.
We're live? All right, we're live. All right. Hey, it's Alex Williams here at Pivotal Spring One Platform Conference. And today I am lucky to have three people from around the world. Chad from the Americas. And you describe yourself as the Americas sales.
I'm responsible for all the Americas customers, but I'm also the PKS, living,
Sales.
breathing, heart, driving product, go to market, all that stuff with my VMware brothers and sisters.
I think you call yourself the sales dude as well.
Say, PKS dude, and America sales. Hi.
We have Lionel Lim,
Hi.
and Lionel's Vice President and Managing Director, Asia Pacific and Japan at Pivotal, and you're out of
Singapore.
Singapore.
Yeah, I'm based
Yes.
in Singapore, but I live in the cloud.
Yes, I was going to say, and Bas Lemmens, who's Vice President and General Manager, EMEA, and you're out of,
The Netherlands,
yeah.
running Europe.
Yeah, and we were saying, you know, you guys all live in the cloud, so this is easy subject matter.
Absolutely.
It feels natural.
Yeah.
It feels natural.
So what are your customers asking you about? What are the questions your customers have about cloud native, about Kubernetes, about continuous delivery? You know, we talk to even technologists who say that people they talk to are sometimes trying to just still figure it out. So what are the customers saying out there? What are they asking about?
My experience is that you get two kind of polar opposite personas, both lost, and then occasionally you find the third who kind of knows the way. You find some that are lost and confused and can't figure out what direction is up. They've got buzzwords flying at them everywhere. They're the walking instantiation of the pointy-haired boss in the Dilbert cartoons, saying, "Hey, why isn't everything cloud native? Containers, Kubernetes, you know,
Right.
done, right?" Then at the other end, you find people who are just absolutely a nerd like me. I'm a nerd and engineer who are fascinated with the tech, and they're going off on like science experiments all over the place, and in the end, lost in their own way.
Uh-huh.
And then you find a lot of customers, they're the subset that focus on, it's not about the tech, it's about basically driving better cloud native app development, focus on that in the business. The technology things are lower down, and a lot of the stories in the keynotes are, you know, the people who've found that proper middle path.
Is that a worldwide phenomenon?
Yeah, it is definitely in Asia. You know, the biggest thing that's kind of swimming through the landscape is how do I compete? And in the era of more and more constrained trade, how do I become even more? How do I be lean and all the various business outcomes that they can get out to be able to compete on a global basis, despite. So I think that's very big. And then, you know, Asia is room to I think about half the world's population of developers are from Asia Pacific. And this group of people are like really very, very obsessed with the new technologies, they're very excited with open source and the Kubernetes stuff and so forth. But that's really at the developer level. So as Chad is saying, there's two polarization. But the customers that we deal with are mostly very focused on their business outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's how it's playing out.
Yeah, for me it's the same. In EMEA, I would say most of the questions we get the most is, assume technology is changing and assume that cloud native is super important. How could you help us to leverage that and train us to become better at that? So I think that's the big theme. I've also noticed that in Europe, for example, C-levels are less tech savvy. Right? The CIOs are more concentrated on, let's say, managing their businesses, managing the outcomes, rather than talking about Kubernetes, for example.
Right, right. One person described it to me as like, you know, at the very top you have the C-levels, and when they get the vision, they get very, very excited about it. Right?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, but then in the bottom level, they're all excited about the technology itself.
Totally.
Yes. But
Yes.
it's the middle layer.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, I dig KubeCon. It's an awesome event, and you know, as one of the people within Pivotal that's like, go Kubernetes, I'm excited about it. It's coming up, and it's going to be great. Love VMworld. I'm going to be in Barcelona, in your territory, your neck of the
Absolutely.
woods. Awesome event, very infrastructure focused. This week is cool, and James Waters said it in the keynote where he basically said it's an event that puts the cloud native developer in the enterprise first. And there's two parts of that sentence that are important. In the enterprise, getting the cloud native developer to be effective and successful, it's actually that middle layer that's actually really, really important, right? There's got to be a platform that supports them, and increasingly Kubernetes is a fundamental part of that platform. But man, if you can't basically support that developer with everything that they need culturally, operationally, process-wise, so they go from idea to prod fast, then it doesn't matter how great the vision of the CEO is, how great the underlying tech is. I think you hit on something. That middle is really important.
Yeah, that middle, it's because, what we hear at Spring One is a lot about customer empathy, right?
Yeah,
totally.
But a lot about the customer and the business outcomes. And isn't it often that the people who are in that middle layer are determining these business outcomes to some extent, or they're like defining the business outcomes?
Yeah.
Mixture. There are some middle ones that are taking more leadership in thought leadership around this area, but there are the frozen middle as well. So
The frozen middle.
yeah,
That's a good way to put it.
In Asia Pacific, the challenge has been it's a very hierarchical society, so functional silos exist in all organizations, and helping customers break through the functional silos through product as a service, product mentality, agile. It's been pretty much of what we've been trying to do, and I think getting a lot of success, and that itself, as you get successful customers starting to be able to show results out of this, that it spurs other companies, frozen middle, from having to do something. So I think 3 years into it, we're seeing more and more traction around they have to do something about.
The thing that I would say, and since this stuff is all online, like everybody who's tuned in, you can easily just Google it and find the links. Seeing the examples of Home Depot and even the Netflix Spring Boot use cases. I was talking with the folks at Garmin today. The common pattern, by the way, in the Home Depot case and the Garmin case, and there's lots and lots of examples in the sessions. There was, it required the support of the top, and yes, there was a lot of technology, but it was actually generally somebody in the middle who was like, I want to do something that's cool, and it's not a giant mega project. It's like a small seed, like something that is their first step, first app that's driven by the. Wouldn't it be cool if we could blank, right? The discussion with the Garmin thing is like their business has been fantastic. It's been growing like crazy, and it's great to have them run all the stuff on the platform, which is awesome, both on and off-prem. But they're like now thinking, hey, we now have a lot of interesting data that we're gathering through devices that are all sorts of devices. How would we use it differently? The ideas to do that creatively rarely come from the CEO. They actually usually come from the middle.
Yeah, but on the other side, let's say, what we see a lot is that the boards, the CIOs, they drive a certain direction.
True.
And they define, let's say, I want to become agile. I need to respond, let's say, to market threats. I need to speed up my organization and product innovation. What's difficult where organizations struggle is to translate that strategic objective into small chunks, into small steps, into projects, into MVPs which developers can build. And my take on this is that we need, let's say, champions. We need leaders in those organizations who have the courage to take a bit of risk and say, look, let's go into this direction. Let's use these modern techniques and start building software and start driving those outcomes and start small. And then once we show the success, like amplify it and let's say work it out and scale it out. And I think that's what we're hearing at Spring One. It was this morning in the keynote. All these beautiful examples. Or was it Home Depot, 6,000 commits?
6,000 commits. It's like, you're right, actually. It's actually a combo of like leadership and support, enabling the risk,
Exactly.
Innovation in middle.
And so what happens to developers then? What are you seeing then with the developers and their role in all this? If we have like this very much this agreement that it is the vision of the CIO, but also it's these projects in the middle that really help form as catalysts for these types of things. I guess it's the middle often who controls a lot of the budget as well. So where does that leave the developer?
Oh, the developers are absolutely important in the whole equation, because they're the one that actually makes the vision of the software, makes the software come real. As I said that in Asia, I think worldwide it's similar. You know, you have between .NET and Java, 90% of the application developers are there. So there's such a huge legacy of Java applications. So the developer enablement becomes extremely important. And companies are beginning to start measuring by themselves by the number of developers they can attract and retain, because that equals to innovation. Because a company that has developers that position as innovation, without those developers that are in-sourced, to help them architecturally in-source the software content, there will be quite a big challenge.
I would almost even put it a little bit different. It would, I mean, to your question, it put the developers front and center in, let's say, the change of those companies. They can add so much value. I mean, this is the era where the developers can basically build the value and change these companies. And that's what, when it was declared on stage, you can feel it in the room, right?
Do they have the budget?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, by the way, they have, everyone has power and control over their own destiny to some extent, right? So, like, look, first of all, you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money to have power and influence. So there's 85 million downloads, of Spring every month. It is Spring Boot has got 1 million projects that are generated a week. That doesn't cost a damn penny, right? You can go to start.spring.io and boom, you're off to the races, right?
There's a lot there.
The other quote literally from a customer today was, if you're not writing code, you're not being productive. It's unproductive work. And so now, he's dialing the contrast like way up to 11 to create a high contrast, thing imperative inside the company. But basically it links to these things. The developer is actually in control. You've got a huge ecosystem. The developer's at the center. They're the innovation center. Budget comes mostly actually from other parts of the organization that fund their work, right? And fund platforms and pay for public cloud bills and support things like, PaaS and PKS deployments on premises in the cloud. But don't confuse the budget thing with power, influence, and impact. Like, basically, if you write software well,
they're influencing that middle layer. They're influencing the CEO.
Exactly, and the gates to budgets are opening because
yeah.
once you have success with software and it's become scalable, I say the team gets confidence, you get this culture change, there will be more and more budget. Those guys will be more and more, let's say, empowered to build even better, let's say, services and features there.
Again, another quote. Just today, we're walking the halls, $1 billion of a company's revenue is going through the software running on the platform. $1 billion. So for that particular customer, it's almost 1/5 of all their revenue. So does that generate budget and impact? Hell yeah.
Yeah, big time. And so it leads me to another question, because you just mentioned empowerment, and empowerment's another theme that we hear quite a bit here.
Sure.
And we hear a lot, again, I was like talking about empathy. These terms have different meanings though, don't they? And I know, and we're all here from different parts of the world, but we all have different kind of perspectives, don't we? And so I'm curious on how are you discussing empathy and empowerment, with your customers in Asia versus Europe versus North America?
We are pretty good in pivotal labs, so we advocate certain way, software engineering methodology, etc. And we go to companies. I mean, the best is to be able to show proof points of success, and if you carve out small projects, go chunk at a time, and then release it. You will start seeing the results, and then they get motivated, and then you replicate more and build a cluster. We've seen companies like Yahoo Japan, from zero agile developers, they have built a place of 200 workstations that enables agile development that supports the entire organization. So when you have companies like that operating in the country, the rest of the people will look up and start to emulate that. And today you have people like Fujitsu doing the same, NTT Data doing the same. So the big boys are actually doing it, and that gives confidence to the whole ecosystem. That's right. I don't know what else.
As a Canadian leading the Americas, so the hat of the United States is Canada. That's how an American would say it, right? Our cultures are so close, but even then we're a little different.
Right.
And the delta between the cultures in the Americas and Latin America is a totally different culture. Culture in Brazil and Argentina and Chile, totally different. And then between our three theaters, but you know what? Human nature is actually pretty similar in many ways, right? I would say, so first things first, don't be an a-hole to anybody. Be nice and be kind is a good principle just in general, right? Be good to people. But there's also something that is very driven around user-centric design. So this we're pretty passionate that basically, user-centric design is important for figuring out what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? And that requires empathy, and it requires you listening to the people who are actually coming to you with the problem and supposed to try to manufacture what the problem is you're trying to solve. That's an example where it's at the center of the process that we're trying to drive customers towards, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say in Europe, right, 27 countries, cultures, very, very different. The empathy thing, being able to put yourselves in the shoes of somebody else, understand the customers, understand different perspectives, and try to, let's say, look at problems holistically, are a game changer. They are very, very important for software developers, for bringing products and services successful. And some of our clients, they don't realize that at the beginning, but as soon as we start to pair up and we start to write code together, let's say we'll try to teach them how we work and how we build software together. And I think that leads to different insights. It leads to different insights on the level of empathy, but also what you say on empowerment. Once we see that those teams are successful and they're driving success, let's say they get more and more space to do other things and give direction to changes or give direction to, let's say, influences in that company, which are pretty profound. And they weren't, let's say, foreseen or defined at the beginning of a project. So I think that's really, really interesting. And the last thing I would say about this is what we hear a lot of customers is once they go through building software together with Pivotal, and once they understand the way of working and our methodology, they start to apply it to different fields. They start to apply it. To engineering. I have manufacturing companies who are applying agile and lean principles. Of course, lean, of course, in the manufacturing, but agile principles to the way they engineer, right? Engineering products, right? So nothing to do with software.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I would just love to kind of get a perspective on your thoughts about, the year ahead. And you've seen the maturity of the organization over the past year. You're starting to see these principles become more widely accepted. We've talked about the middle and the contrast to the C-level and the technologists themselves. What are some of the forces you see at play and in the adoption patterns that you've noticed that you think will influence these next 12 to 18 months?
So first, there's mega macro. So mega macro is we're going into an interesting geopolitical time. There's interesting things going on between nations. Trade is unsettled. That pendulum swings and swings and swings back and moves. I'm an eternal optimist. So things seem a little down sometimes. Things turn around. Then a little less macro than that, which I think is maybe where your question is aiming. I'm really excited to basically see a lot of the things that are the emergent patterns of functions, event streaming architectures. Again, I'm as a nerd, I focus on the tech, but it's really interesting to see how those things are being applied in retail and in banking sectors and in healthcare, in different ways, but the same architectural model keeps popping up. And that's cool because everyone's always kind of wondering like, okay, what's the next thing? So, the first phase of cloud native was approaches, and then it was 12-factor principles, and then it was basically applying those together into modern cloud native platforms. And people are like, well, what's next? And it's like more of that, but add in these event streaming and functional programming models kind of becoming ascendant. That's pretty cool. And then, very selfishly, at the least macro, it's going to be the year where VMware and Pivotal become one company.
There you go.
I'm excited about it. We've had a lot of impact as little old Pivotal. VMware has a much bigger impact radius in the world. Pivotal was born out of VMware originally, so it's like coming back home to
Full circle.
Full circle, right? But at the same time, VMware is also changing as a company to be very focused on open source software, on the developer, which is a new domain for them. I'm excited about it. It's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's the same here. I mean, the multi-cloud is going to be a big thing for the region, and Tanzu really is addressing and spills to the build.
Maybe you could just explain a little bit about Tanzu for people who may not be familiar.
Okay, so Tanzu is VMware, from VMware. It really encompasses the building, running, and managing applications in a multi-cloud environment, regardless of the underlying infrastructure.
It also, Tanzu is also, it's Swahili for branch, and it's Japanese for container-based furniture. It's a little weird. It's a little weird the first time you say it, but so is Azure. I was like, what does Azure really mean?
So
and someone goes blue, and I'm like, oh yeah, it actually means blue. I forgot about that. Azure, yeah.
There you go.
But it does represent the what Pivotal, VMware, Bitnami, Heptio all coming together. It is the new branch of VMware that will focus on the world of cloud native.
So with the multi-cloud.
Multi-cloud, yeah. Second piece of I see happening is the partner community. Because of VMware, they have like 70,000 partners. Many of them were infra and now really trying to look to move up towards the chain, towards the building part. So I think that that's going to be exciting. A lot of work, but retooling and enabling the partner community to move will just be able to accelerate the adoption.
I would just add a different perspective, right? An inside-out perspective, which is to me, it's becoming more and more clear that companies have to change, and the software is key. So, in EMEA, in Europe, this conversation is everywhere. It is becoming so clear. There's so much evidence that cloud-native software is the key to differentiate, and is the key to drive change, and that's happening everywhere, right? Yes, on a multi-cloud. Yes, using let's say Kubernetes technology. Absolutely, but the key, what I see in boards and in decision makers, is they have to change and they need to do it now, and the pressure is raising. And with these, let's say, good examples spreading around the world, it's time to change, and software is helping that.
And change is exciting and awesome.
Isn't it? Well, that's a great way to end this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time, the three of you. It's really fun. Yeah,
Thanks,
really
Alex.
appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah.